Emily, an elderly woman in her 70s, lives a simple life in a small house on the outskirts of the city. Every morning, she spends time tending to the small garden in front of her house, which is filled with greenery and vibrant flowers. The fourth-level house is simple but always clean and cozy, reflecting her frugal and gentle personality. Few people know that this old woman was once an illustrious businessman, holding many real estate properties and the largest shareholder of a prestigious private hospital in the area. Despite owning a significant fortune, Emily chose to live a humble life, away from glory and fame to enjoy quiet days. In everyday life, she did not wear expensive clothes, but only old sweaters, which were well-patched but always neat and clean. For Emily, the real value lies not in her extravagant appearance, but in the way she lives true to her true self. That simple life is not only a choice but also a philosophy of life that she always cherishes. One fine morning, Emily decided to go to the city for a medical examination after days of suffering from dull pain in her chest. Not wanting to disturb her children and grandchildren, who were busy with work and her own family, she took the crowded bus herself. With a slow gait and old rubber slippers on her feet, she carried an old but still valid health insurance card and entered the large gate of the famous private hospital. The hospital is modern, crowded and bustling with flows of people, from patients to medical staff. Emily, with her old eyes, read the signs intently and slowly made her way to the front desk. When it was her turn, she smiled softly and said to the young receptionist, "Hello, I want to register for a medical examination." However, the receptionist's gaze quickly swept over Emily's simple clothes, revealing an unsympathetic look. Receiving the health insurance card from her hand, she frowned, and then coldly let go. "What kind of insurance card is so old? You can do it again next time." Emily just smiled softly and replied, "Thank you for reminding me. I'll take note." After that, the girl dropped the paper hard on the table, pointed to the waiting chair and said, "Number 92, wait for your turn." Sitting in the waiting area, Emily clearly felt the tense and noisy atmosphere around her. The sound of talking, the sound of children crying, and tired, worried faces create a claustrophobic space. Several people sitting near her, including a young couple, slightly covered their noses and whispered, "Oh my God, what does this smell like? Look at the old lady's clothes. She must have come from the countryside." Emily heard it all but was silent, bowing her head. Her eyes were a little sad, but she was not angry, nor did she blame. In her life, she was accustomed to judgments based on appearances and was always tolerant of those who did not understand the value of kindness. When her order number was called, Emily slowly walked into the clinic, carrying an old cloth bag with her as a habit. Greeting her was a young doctor, who seemed to be busy with the pile of medical records in front of her. Without raising his head to look at the patient, he asked quickly, "What pain do you have?" "Chest pain, shortness of breath," Emily replied in a soft, somewhat shy voice. The doctor still did not take his eyes off the file and continued to ask, "Do you have a history of cardiovascular disease?" She replied honestly, "Yes, I don't know. I rarely go to the doctor." At this time, the doctor looked up, his eyebrows furrowed as if to show reproach. "Being so old without going to regular checkups. When you are seriously ill, how can you cure it?" His words made Emily pause slightly, not because of the feeling of being reprimanded, but because of the lack of interest in the doctor's attitude. However, she remained calm and replied softly, "Thank you, doctor, I will take note." After quickly writing down the test instructions, the doctor motioned for her to leave the room. Emily thanked him, and then slowly walked back to the testing area as instructed. Here, the scenery is no different from the waiting area before, with long queues of patients, name-calling, and a stifling atmosphere. When it was her turn, Emily entered the laboratory, where a young medical worker with a frowning face was picking up the patient. "Hurry up, ma'am. How many people are waiting?" he urged. Emily was a little confused and replied softly, "You understand? I'm old, so I walk slowly." But her words did not make the employee any less uncomfortable. During the test, her thin, trembling hands made the measuring device unstable. The employee sighed, his voice grumbling. "Why is it so slow? People do it for a minute, you can't sit here forever." Emily tried to follow the instructions, but couldn't hide her embarrassment. She said softly, her voice so low that he had to stop to listen. "I'm sorry. I'm not used to modern equipment. You sympathize with me." Her words made the employee pause for a moment, but then he continued his work reluctantly, placing the test slip firmly on the table and not saying a word. Emily bowed her head in thanks, picked up the ticket, and walked out. In her old eyes, there was still a glimmer of tolerance, even though her words and actions might have hurt anyone else. A few days later, the hospital held an important meeting attended by the management, senior doctors, and shareholders. The meeting was to discuss the development strategy and financial plan for the coming year. The atmosphere in the large room was solemn, and all eyes were on the chair at the head of the table, which would decide the future of the hospital. While everyone was still preparing documents, the door of the meeting room suddenly opened. The appearance of the person who entered made the whole room seem to be silent. Emily walked in, but this time it was no longer the simple old woman in the old sweater. Instead, she appeared in a light blue, elegant AO dye, with gentle but delicate pattern details. Her face was still gentle as usual, but her eyes exuded majesty and poise. Her confident steps stunned those attending the meeting. The president of the hospital immediately stood up, bowed to her in a respectful voice. "Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to introduce Ms. Emily, the largest shareholder of the hospital and also the founder, who has contributed significantly to our development during the past 2 decades." Those introductions made the whole room sink into shock. No one expected that the simple woman who had been looked down on in the past was one of the most important people for the hospital. Embarrassed eyes began to appear on each person's face, especially those who had unintentionally or deliberately shown contempt for her. Emily remained calm. She stepped onto the podium, where there was a simple microphone. The whole meeting room was silent like a sheet. No one dared to speak. In a soft but authoritative voice, she began, "I didn't come here to make it difficult for anyone. What I want to say is, no matter how big or modern the hospital is, the most important thing is how we treat the patients, the people who come here for help." She paused for a moment. Her gaze slowly swept over each person in the room. "During my last medical trip, I experienced everything from start to finish. I realized that our staff, from the front desk to the doctors and nurses, sometimes forget the core values of the medical profession." Her words rang like an awakening bell. Every sentence seemed to touch the self-esteem of those present. Emily continued, "We are not service machines or technological tools. We are the ones who bring hope and comfort to patients. But if we judge them by appearance or money, we ourselves have lost our mission." The whole room was as silent as a sheet. The remorseful eyes, the bowed faces clearly showed shame. Emily ended her speech with a gentle smile, like a teacher teaching a profound lesson to her students. It is a lesson not only about medical ethics, but also about how to live, how to treat people with compassion. After Emily's speech, the atmosphere in the meeting room seemed to be special. No one dared to speak up, but in their hearts everyone was asking themselves. Doctors and medical staff who had been disrespectful to her began to feel ashamed. They understand that they have forgotten the great responsibility of the medical profession, the responsibility to bring hope and comfort to patients, no matter who they are. Immediately after the meeting, the hospital management quickly reorganized staff training programs, emphasizing the value of humanity in the way of communicating and caring for patients. Special training sessions are designed not only to improve professionalism, but also to instill compassion. Doctors and medical staff who had shown a cold attitude to Emily took the initiative to seek out her to apologize. One of them was a young doctor who had met her in the clinic. He stopped in the corridor, bowed his head and said in a regretful voice, "I'm sorry. I didn't know who you were at the time and was very heartless. I really regret my attitude." Emily smiled, her eyes still as gentle as ever. "Don't worry, young doctor. I don't blame you. What I want is for you to remember that every patient is a human being, no matter what they look like or where they come from. Treat them the way you would want your loved ones to be treated. Her words were like a spreading fire, inspiring the entire medical team in the hospital. The training sessions became a place to share touching stories of empathy and compassion. Those who were once criticized for their improper attitudes are now pioneers in changing the way patients are cared for. Gradually, the hospital is not only famous for its quality of medical examination and treatment, but also becomes a symbol of dedication and compassion. From Emily's teachings, the medical team has learned to put themselves in the patient's shoes, feel their pain and anxiety, and treat them with sincere respect and compassion. Emily's story is not only a lesson for those in the hospital, but also a lesson for everyone about how to see the true value of human beings, not through appearance or status, but through the heart and heart. The change in the hospital that began with Emily's gentle but authoritative words quickly spread to the entire medical system of the region. The hospital management not only stops at improving the attitude of staff, but also implements community programs to raise awareness of the value of compassion in the medical profession. Seminars and experience sharing sessions are held regularly where doctors, nurses, and medical staff recount their memorable stories of working with patients. Stories about empathy, about how even a small action can bring great hope, make people appreciate the meaning of their work more. Emily also participates in these programs, but as a listener rather than a teacher. She doesn't need to say much, because her presence is a living testament to the values she wants to convey. Every time Emily appeared, she was no longer an old woman in an old sweater, but a symbol of humility, wisdom, and kindness. The reforms do not stop within the hospital. The hospital began offering soft skills classes for medical students, with an emphasis on building doctor-patient relationships. Young generations of doctors and nurses enter the profession with a fresh and positive attitude, understanding that medical knowledge is important, but empathy and compassion are the keys to making a difference in patients' lives. The hospital has gradually become a symbol not only because of its high-quality medical services, but also because of the way they treat patients with their hearts. Patients who come here no longer feel anxious or apprehensive, but instead feel welcome and appreciated. Emily's story has also become an inspiration for many other hospitals. Health organizations in the region began to learn from this model, replicating the values Emily inspired. Lessons in compassion, humility, and kindness to others not only change the medical environment but also the way people perceive each other in their daily lives. Emily continues to live her simple life, quietly but meaningfully. Her contributions, even if they do not need any recognition or honor, still leave a deep impression in the hearts of each person, becoming a valuable lesson for both the present and the future. The fact that Emily appeared at the hospital board meeting not only left a strong impression internally but also awakened the conscience of each individual who came into contact with her during that fateful medical trip. The staff who had behaved coldly and disrespectfully to her felt deep regret when they realized that the woman they had judged by their appearance was the one who had made a great contribution to the existence and development of the hospital. Many people took the initiative to come to Emily to apologize. One of them was the receptionist, who had an unsympathetic look and indifferent words to her at the front desk. She lowered her head, her voice trembling. "I'm really sorry, Mrs. Emily. I didn't know who she was at the time and misbehaved. I hope you forgive me for my lack of professionalism." Emily, as always, remained calm. She smiled softly, her eyes still gentle and warm. "Don't worry, young girl. What has passed is not as important as what we learn from it. I hope you will treat people with respect and kindness, no matter who they are." Emily's advice not only calmed the employee's heart, but also became a motivation for her to change her way of working. She no longer sees patients by their appearances or the papers they bring, but begins to pay attention to every word, each of their smallest needs, seeing it as an opportunity to help and comfort others. The young doctor, who had taken a judgmental attitude when examining Emily, was also embarrassed. He found her in the hospital corridor, bowing his head remorsefully. "Mrs. Emily, I don't know who you are, but that's not a reason for me to behave disrespectfully. I am very ashamed of my actions. Thank you for teaching me a valuable lesson." Emily just smiled again, placing her hand lightly on his shoulder. "Remember that every patient is a story. Treat them the way you would like your loved ones to be treated. When you do that, you will not only be a good doctor, but also a good person. Her simple words are like seeds that are sown in the hearts of everyone, from receptionists, nurses, to doctors. They began to change, not only out of remorse but also out of respect for her and the values she represented. Emily's story is mentioned many times in meetings, training courses, and even in informal talks between employees. Lessons in kindness, humility, and kindness to others become a guideline, not only in their work but also in their daily lives. Emily, though she doesn't need fame or praise, is still a silent teacher who teaches people a lesson in kindness and the power of kindness. What she left behind is not only a change in the work environment but also a timeless spiritual legacy. At the board meeting, Emily not only appeared with a completely different image but also carried a strong message. When she stepped on the podium, all eyes were on her, curiosity mixed with apprehension evident on each person's face. With a soft but authoritative voice, Emily began to share about her experience of coming to the hospital as an ordinary patient. She said, "I'm not here to criticize anybody, but what I want to share is an experience that has made me reflect a lot on how we are carrying out our mission. This hospital was built not only to heal the body, but also to comfort tired hearts. However, during the last trip, I noticed one heartbreaking thing. We have forgotten the core values of the medical profession: empathy and compassion." Emily's words seemed to swirl deep into each person's mind. A silence filled the room as she continued. "No one comes here without a pain, whether physical or mental. But if we, who are entrusted with the responsibility to heal, treat them with indifference or judge them by their appearance, are we really fulfilling our mission?" She paused for a moment. Her eyes swept over each person in the room, as if she wanted to touch their hearts. "I don't blame anyone. Instead, I hope that each of us will look back and ask ourselves, what have we done to live up to the trust that our patients have given us? Remember that empathy is not a luxury. It is a necessary condition for us to truly become healers." Emily's speech was not long, but every word she spoke contained a power that touched people's hearts. The silence lasted for a long time after she ended. Many eyes looked down, their shoulders shook slightly, as if they were facing their own conscience. The hospital president, who had previously maintained a cold professional demeanor, stood up and bowed to Emily. He said, his voice trembling, "Mrs. Emily, what you said woke us up. This is a lesson not only for our team, but also for myself. We promised to change." That day's meeting not only left a historical mark in the hospital, but also opened a new page in the way of looking at medical ethics. From Emily's simple but sincere words, a wave of change has begun, bringing hope for a humane and warm medical environment.